Last Rosh Hashanah, I shared about our recent visit to Israel and an experience of Yerushalayim Shel Mala, the heavenly or ideal Israel, and the ideal Jerusalem. We went on our last night to Jerusalem's first station, a newish cultural center built at a previously abandoned 19th century train station. That night we walked past shops and yoga classes, restaurants offering dishes that were kosher and halal. We watched Arabs, secular, Muslim and Christian, and Jews, secular, modern Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, Israelis playing and eating and Zumbaing and riding the carousel, recreating peacefully in the same shared space. It was a fleeting realization of Yerushalayim Shel Mala, the heavenly or ideal Jerusalem, a messianic vision that we hope to make real and lasting. During the past year, our collective focus has shifted as we have been confronted by Yerushalayim and Yisrael Shel Mata, the struggles of the earthly Israel, especially following October 7th, a catastrophic day in our history. The ideal Israel is unobtainable. While hostages remain captive in Gaza, while terrorist missiles rain down indiscriminately on civilian areas throughout Israel, while Israeli warfighters and reservists are deployed in Gaza, along Israel's northern border, and even in Lebanon. The ideal Israel is unattainable while we feel vulnerable and threatened and alone amidst a national and global rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiments. As Israel is portrayed in much of the media and by pro-Palestinian campus demonstrators as a vicious aggressor, we are witnessing how sympathy builds, not for Israel, but for a zealous terrorist organization committed to the destruction of Israel. Never mind that these terrorists started the war. Never mind that they are using hostages and civilians in Gaza as human shields. Never mind that Israel has tried to minimize civilian casualties in rooting out the terrorists. I am deeply disturbed by a false binary surrounding support of Israel that reduces the complex reality of the conflict to a simplistic choice that one can either be pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian. And I know that many in our sacred community are struggling with this false binary as well. Zealots and extremists gloss over complexity and have created and promoted this false binary, insisting we need to support their side, and they delegitimate the other. I also reject the idea of moral equivalency between the zealots. Terrorists who claim to support the Palestinian side have one ultimate goal: to destroy the Jewish state. We have learned from our history that when zealots have their way, catastrophe ensues. The original Zealots were a fanatical faction of militant Jews who were living in and around Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. They initiated a revolt against the Roman Empire, the greatest military power on earth. When the Roman army surrounded Jerusalem, the Zealots set fire to the collective food supply to ensure that Jewish residents had no choice but to fight the Zealots, to join the Zealots in their fight. It was a show of faith. The Zealots were confident that God would protect them. But the Zealots were proven wrong when God did not intervene. The Second Temple was destroyed, and most of the Jewish community was forcibly exiled from the land of Israel for 2,000 years. Today, we are witnessing another potential Jewish catastrophe driven by modern-day Messianist zealots. The political theorist Michael Walzer recently observed that Hamas and Hezbollah are fighting against Israel for an immoral and unjust purpose, the elimination of the Jewish state. The goal is religiously driven and zealously pursued. The original Hamas charter, written in 1988, stated their messianic hopes. The day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight the Jews, killing the Jews. A statement of principles and policies released by Hamas in 2017 may sound less violent, though the attacks of October 7th demonstrated the true nature of Hamas, not how it self-describes on paper. The cold-blooded murder and abduction of Israeli children and civilians on the Jewish holiday of Simchat Torah and the unspeakable horrors perpetrated at the Nova Music Festival are far beyond the pale of armed resistance. Israel was caught off guard as Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists savagely destroyed lives, families, and communities, traumatizing the nation and piercing an aura of safety. In the years since, Hamas and Islamic Jihad have made martyrs of thousands of innocent Palestinian men, women, and children in Gaza to evoke sympathy for their cause and to turn international public opinion against Israel. The Israel Defense Forces may succeed in eliminating terrorist leaders and their mazes of tunnels in Gaza and southern Lebanon, but the religious ideologies that drive Hamas, Hezbollah, and other Islamic zealots and terrorist organizations, these are far more difficult, if not impossible, to destroy. Sadly, the danger of messianic zealots is not unique to pro-Palestinian jihadists. In 1995, Jewish zealots called for the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin to sabotage, to derail the Oslo peace process. A year earlier, a Jewish zealot, an American-born Israeli physician, a graduate of Albert Einstein College of Medicine, Baruch Goldstein, entered a mosque in Hebron, a contested city deep in the West Bank, during Ramadan, and opened fire on several hundred worshipers, killing 29 and wounding 125. Goldstein was killed, and his vile actions were condemned by all mainstream Israeli and Jewish groups, but he remains a hero to ultra-nationalist and supremacist and zealot Jews who call for the expulsion of Palestinian Arabs from the Holy Land they believe was given to the Jewish people by God. In 2004, while living in Jerusalem, I joined a group of ultra-Orthodox Jews and Orthodox settlers on a bus tour to Hebron, which at the time was under the control of the Palestinian Authority, except for a small section of the old city that we were visiting. Our bus was armored, and we could hardly see through the chicken wire that covered the windows. It was the type of tour you tell your parents about after you've returned safely. As we drove past Kiryat Arba, a Jewish settlement on the outskirts of Hebron, our guide pointed out the grave of Baruch Goldstein. And I was sickened as many of the bus riders started to cheer. 20 years later, I am sickened that an ultra-nationalist Jewish zealot who openly reveres Baruch Goldstein is a pivotal member of Israel's governing coalition and serves as the Minister of National Security, responsible for overseeing Israel's civilian police force. Itamar Ben-Gvir has a long history of making unapologetically racist, anti-Arab comments, as well as a criminal history. He's been convicted for incitement and for supporting anti-Arab terrorist organizations. It is no surprise that in the years that Ben-Gvir has been serving as Minister of National Security, violent crime has risen exponentially in Israeli Arab communities, as Ben-Gvir has shifted police resources away from communities that are not Jewish. From my encounters with Jewish zealots and ultra-nationalists, what stands out in my mind was their certainty that God gave Israel to the Jewish people and that Jewish sovereignty exclusively should extend from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, the promised land described in the Torah. Zealots who claim to support the Palestinian cause similarly seek to make the same territory an Islamic state, exclusively led by Palestinian people. So long as these incompatible messianic ideologies hold sway, there will only be more bloodshed, more suffering. If there is any hope for peace between Israelis and Palestinians, the zealots on both sides must be sidelined, for they have done everything in their power to prevent a solution to the conflict. Each of these messianic zealot groups believes that God is on their side, and they seek imminent divine intervention from God to realize their respective religious visions of Yerushalayim Shel Mala, the heavenly or perfected Jerusalem, which will be realized at Olam Haba, the world to come, or Yom Adin, Judgment Day. One of the names for Rosh Hashanah in our tradition is Yom Hadin, Day of Judgment. In our tradition, what are we feeling? What are we doing? We feel sorry, we feel sorrow for the families who lost loved ones on October 7th. We pray for the safe and speedy return of the hostages. We can feel sorrow for the innocent Palestinian people who have been killed and displaced in Gaza and Lebanon. And we sympathize with the Israelis who have been displaced in northern Israel by Hezbollah rocket fire. We feel gratitude to the Israel Defense Forces and a coalition led by our United States military, who have now twice shielded Israeli citizens from Iranian ballistic missile attacks. Above all, we love and support and advocate for Israel in its struggle to survive and ultimately find a path to peace with its neighbors. In accepting the 1986 Nobel Peace Prize, Elie Wiesel said, "We must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim." Our Jewish obligation to stand up for the oppressed is rooted in Torah. 36 times we are commanded to welcome and avoid causing distress to the stranger in our midst, for we have known what it means to be excluded and oppressed. Wiesel, a passionate Zionist and ardent supporter of Israel and the Jewish people, continued by addressing the conflict with the Palestinian people directly. He said, "There are the Palestinians to whose plight I am sensitive, but to whose methods I deplore. Violence and terrorism are not the answer. Something must be done about their suffering, and soon. Let Israel be given a chance. Let hatred and danger be removed from our horizons, and there will be peace in and around the Holy Land." How amazing it was just this past Tuesday and last April to see that the military coalition that responded and deflected most of the Iranian missiles included Israel's neighbor and former adversary, Jordan, a country which attacked and attempted to destroy Israel during the Independence War, the Six-Day War, and the Yom Kippur War. A lasting peace can be achieved. This past summer, I was serving on the faculty at Eisner Camp in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. One afternoon, we gathered campers in front of a giant timeline and took turns teaching about famous Zionists. I picked Israel's 11th Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon. General Sharon, Arik Sharon, was a hawkish, hardline nationalist. When he was elected prime minister in 2001, he had served in the defense of Israel in many capacities and in every conflict. He was once called the greatest field commander in Israel's history by Yitzhak Rabin, who himself was a tremendously successful general. In September 2000, during a period of relative calm, Sharon led a group of right-wing Israeli leaders to visit the Temple Mount in Jerusalem to assert the right of Israelis to visit. The visit was seen by many as a provocation, and it led to the Second Intifada, a 5-year period of intense violence and bomb attacks targeting Israeli civilians. I was living in Israel in 2004 when Ariel Sharon announced plans to dismantle all the Jewish settlements in the Gaza Strip, along with 4 settlements in the West Bank. Like Yitzhak Rabin, who recognized that Israel's future security depended upon peace, Sharon believed that unilateral withdrawal from Gaza was a way to ensure Israel's security, especially when there was no Palestinian partner to pursue a peace process. Without a Palestinian civil authority or police force in Gaza, Israeli soldiers were forced to function as police and maintain order, meaning that they were in harm's way, performing a task that they were not trained to do. In the International Court of Public Opinion, it looked good for Israel to give up occupied territory and encourage Palestinian self-rule rather than continuing as an occupying force. More than 8,000 Jewish settlers living in 21 settlements in Gaza and 4 in the West Bank were eventually displaced, forced from their homes by Israeli soldiers. the disengagement plan met with strong resistance from many in Sharon's right-wing base. In November 2004, as we were preparing to mark the anniversary of Rabin's assassination, zealots spray-painted, "We got Rabin and we'll get Sharon," around Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. A small but highly organized and very vocal group began bringing protesters, giving the appearance that most Israelis were opposed to the disengagement, when in fact a significant majority of Israelis supported the plan. An Israeli camp counselor approached me and expressed surprise by my selection of Sharon. "Reform rabbis are generally dovish," he said. Sharon had a hawkish reputation. I explained that Sharon had the courage to make a decision he knew would infuriate his political base. He showed the kind of courage and daring that had made him a military hero. Unfortunately, Sharon experienced a massive stroke while in office and was unable to fully realize any plan he might have had to end the conflict. But that is the kind of bold leadership we need today in Israel and across the Arab world if we hope to see peace in our time. We must stand with Israel. We must pray for the well-being and the speedy return of the hostages. We must stand together, even while we oppose actions or policies we find troubling or even morally reprehensible. And we must not fall into the trap of those who wish to impose upon us their definition of support for Israel. There is no simple solution to this festering century-old conflict. Do not believe anyone who insists otherwise. We need to learn more about Israel to appreciate the depth of the complexity and to recognize the tremendous amount of misleading and false information coming at us from all directions. And again, we must beware of false binary narratives and false moral equivalencies. In preparing for today, I easily wrote 100 single-spaced pages. I'm sure I could have spoken until Yom Kippur. And I'm grateful for the wisdom and editorial advice of Aaron Hurt Mannheimer, and you should all be grateful for his editorial advice as well. Israel is a complex subject, and I know there are many points of view in our sacred community. And events of the past year, even the past few days, have only added to the complexity. Aaron has been educating many in our sacred community about the history of the conflict. He's been working with Kathy Deutschman, the director of our B'Yachad program, to help revamp our Israel curriculum. And I'll put Aaron on the spot and say that he's going to teach more classes about Israel in the weeks and months ahead to interested adults in our congregation. As we continue to imagine and hope and pray for Yisrael Shel Mala, the realization of a heavenly and perfected Israel, and stand with Yisrael Shel Mata, the earthly Israel. Let us recognize the dangers posed by zealots. And let us also remain committed to a democratic Jewish homeland living in peace and harmony alongside her neighbors. Amen. And Ken Yehi Ratzon, be this God's will.